Hi there. Over the course of the next couple of months, I'm going to introduce you to a range of ordinary and extraordinary people and ask them about the moments in time that changed their lives. In August 2008, photojournalist Nigel Brennan received a call from an old girlfriend and colleague, Amanda Lindhout, asking him to travel to Somalia with her to take photos for a story she was writing. After thinking about it, he agreed, confident his experience and preparations would keep them safe. But only days after arriving in Mogadishu, Nigel and Amanda were kidnapped by gunmen armed with AK-47s, who went on to demand millions from their families for their releases. Welcome to Turning Points. Nigel, take me back to that time in August 2008 and the process that came together for you to make the decision to go to Somalia. You were in the UK at the time.
I was actually living in Scotland at the time with a girlfriend. Hadn't been in contact with Amanda for about 8 or 9 months, and reconnected with her, and she asked me what I was doing, and at that stage she was in Iraq working for Press TV. And we'd had a couple of conversations over a couple of weeks, and then she rang me and she said, I'm thinking about going to Mogadishu in Somalia to do some stories. Do you want to come?
Working relationship, journalist needs a photographer to back up the story, or you'd enjoyed working together before and were keen to do that again?
Oh, we had travelled together before in Ethiopia back in 2006. So Amanda was more doing sort of video journalism stuff. I was going to go as a freelance photojournalist. Yep. So, look, I'd had a burning desire to become, I guess, I don't want to call them a war correspondent or a war reporter. I guess I wanted to go into a conflict zone to sort of record what occurs, and especially in Somalia, was a country that had been ravaged by war for 18 years. There was a humanitarian disaster, a food crisis going on. Basically, the world had sort of forgotten about it. I had thought about going to Iraq and Afghanistan. For me as a freelancer, it was like, well, I guess trying to cover that story that's already been covered by journalists, by thousands of journalists. I was very ambitious, wanted to make a name for myself, so I thought, this would be a great opportunity to go in, get some amazing shots for my portfolio, try and come out and try and sell some of that work.
And that's the actual reality of that career, isn't it? You've got to put yourself in that position, get the work done, get the pictures, and then come back and present themselves as the work.
Yeah, look, definitely, and that's going on at the moment in Syria, and that's what happened in Libya as well. I guess you can call them freelancers or backpacker journos that sort of lob in there, have absolutely no security, take massive risks, and come out. And that's because of our industry, especially in journalism, where I guess it's an industry that's, they are not employing full-time people, and they are more dependent on freelancers to take those sorts of risks, yet mainstream media won't actually cover a freelancer.
It's interesting. It's a sort of a rite of passage, I guess. In many ways, you've got to prove to the bosses, to the readers, that you've got the balls, the cojones, the toughness to go out there.
Oh, for sure. And this is not something new. This has sort of happened from the Second World War. Vietnam was a classic example. Guys taking massive risks to stay in country to tell stories as well.
So what were the circumstances that you found when you arrived in Somalia?
We had done preparation before going in, so we'd had a fixer to organise our drivers and our security and stuff like that. But looking back, certainly wasn't as prepared anywhere as near as prepared as I should have been. And flying into Mogadishu Airport, International Airport, and getting off the plane and walking into that arrival hall felt like a complete alien, that I didn't belong there. So obviously we're the only 2 white people in the terminal, confronted by, I guess, African Union forces belting locals with sticks at the luggage carousel, and then within the first 2 or 3 minutes had our first bribe, guy trying to get us an entry visa, which we'd already paid for in Kenya. And then, getting in the car with the 2 guys with our AK-47s and a driver, and Abdi, who would end up being Amanda's cameraman and our translator, and then driving back to the hotel and just looking around and seeing a city that had been decimated. And you could see the 18 years of scars.
Have any, apart from the obvious misgivings of the situation, how did you feel about being there at the time? I know you're obviously feeling very alien, but that's the environment that you've got to be in.
Yeah, look, it was weird. I can remember I think it was the first night or the second night with Amanda, we went and stood up on the roof of the hotel. And we're in a city that was meant to be in the top 3 most dangerous in the world at that stage, and we'd actually gone upstairs just to try and get a bit of a lookout vantage point, and the city was so incredibly serene and quiet. No gunshots, none of that sort of noise that you would expect from a city that was being ravaged by war at that point in time. But in those first 3 days when we were working, I felt incredibly calm and comfortable. Was obviously very aware when we were walking around parts of the city, like in the port area where I took photos anyhow, where we spent probably an hour and a half walking through that part of the city, talking to locals. I guess I felt comfortable because I had the 2 guys with the AK-47s constantly shepherding us. So we always had that sort of security around us. In hindsight, should have had probably 20 of these guys, especially when we were going out on the 4th day.
So how do you gather that information that you need to be secure in your own mind, that you have got the right circumstances, that you have got the right security? You can really only talk to the people that you have access to.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. That's really the hardest thing for any journalist going into a country, because you don't know anything really. You're going in, you're trying to get a story, so you will employ a fixer, which every single media outlet does around the world. And
you swap their names, their contact details around.
A lot of people will actually just find them at an airport. They will fly in, go up to the first guy that speaks English and say, do you know someone that has a car that speaks English that can translate for us? And he becomes your fixer. So we'd pre-organised a fixer that had come through other journalists that had used him. So I guess, and you are dependent on him to keep you safe. He's the one that has the contacts, so you are relying on him as well to set up those meetings, like we did with the WFP, World Food Programme, and then UNICEF, and the feeding stations that we were going to. So he lines up all of that. So in some respects, we had ideas of what we wanted to do. So one of them was going to the biggest market, I think it's the 2nd biggest market in Africa, which is based in the capital, Mogadishu. And when we said we wanted to go there, he said, I'm not letting you go there, not a chance. He said, you will be killed within 20 seconds of stepping out of a car. So there were things that we obviously had a list of what we wanted to do. A lot of that he just scrapped within the first few hours of us meeting him. He said, no, I won't take the risk, and I won't let you take the risk to do that. Moving forward to that day. Yep.
You had security in the car with you, you knew where you were headed. How did that go down?
Not as planned. That's certainly one way to say it. We had security. We had organised the night before as well. The fixer had said to us we were going to require more security because we were going into an area that wasn't as secure as the capital. So from my point of view, I thought we were going to have 5 guys that were basically shepherding us for that day. The plan changed very quickly when we got to the city limits, and we dumped our 2 security guards. And Abdi, the cameraman, said to I asked him to explain what was going on, and he said, look, they are classed as government forces. We're going into a militia-run area, and if they are found in the vehicle, then basically what will happen is people will just start opening fire in the car. So we did something incredibly stupid, and we thought we'll do the 5-kilometre dash without security, and we'll then pick up our extra security detail. And it wasn't until we got to, we got through that 5 kilometres, it was when we actually stopped at what we thought was going to be our security detail, that it turned out to be an ambush.
So what goes through your mind when you look out the window of the car and you see strange men armed with AK-47s screaming at you to get out of the car?
I don't think much goes through your mind at all. Completely frozen, actually. I think when you're in an incredibly stressful situation like that, your brain sort of freezes. And I can remember thinking that when we're actually pulled out of the vehicle, well, it is that this isn't actually happening. This is a dream or something. And then being put back into the vehicle, all 5 of us in the back seat, and when we were then driving across country, I was actually really worried about my camera gear. I thought, shit, I'm going to lose, $5,000 or $10,000 worth of camera kit here. wasn't even thinking that they were going to, hold us for ransom. And then as that trip, which it ended up being about 45 minutes in a car until we were taken to a compound. I guess as that trip prolonged, it was like, oh, this is not good. And they were trying to reassure us. They were saying, our commanders want to interview. They want to know why you're in the country and what you're doing here. So, and I guess it was comforting to know that someone in the vehicle spoke English. And it wasn't until that evening when we got to meet the so-called commanders that they came in and, well, they firstly accused us of being spies working with the Ethiopian forces that were in control of the African Union military that was there at the time. Mm-hmm. They then believed us that we were freelance journalists, but they said because you're from Australia and Canada and both of your countries have been in a crusade against Islam, that they were going to hold us for ransom. And we were then forced to hand over a phone number, which I gave my parents' phone number because that was the only number I could really remember offhand. And they came back in the morning and said, Adam, who was their spokesperson, said, I've spoken to your sister Nikki, and that's, I guess, when the penny really sort of dropped that, right, my family have just had this news come into their house. Mm. And Adam then said that we're giving them 24 hours. If we don't get money within 24 hours, then we will execute both of you.
You kind of have the feeling at the time that they were kind of making it up on the run, that they weren't really sure what their initial...
Oh no! Look, in those first few days, certainly that first day when that threat was hanging over our head, because they would constantly come in every hour or so. One guy in particular who had the most evil eyes I've ever seen in my life, and he would look at us and say, something like, "How do you feel? You okay? 50-50? Are you ready to die?" Because he'd look at his watch and say, in 19 hours we're going to execute you. And when he used to leave, Amanda and I would obviously try and keep each other calm and just say, this isn't going to happen, we have to remain positive. But it's weird, being kidnapped is such a surreal experience, and the longer obviously you go through it, then it probably took me 11 months to come to the realisation that this is my life. I've accepted what my life has become, but certainly in those first few weeks or months it is denial, and you can't help but have fatalistic thoughts. And I had seen enough videos that came out of Iraq and Afghanistan of journalists and military people that had been executed to make a political statement. So we had no idea who we were dealing with. They called themselves the Somali Mujahideen. So it was like, what does that mean?
You don't know if it's an official group, if it's just a couple of guys with guns.
Yeah. And I'd obviously heard about Al-Shabaab, which is the Al-Qaeda linked group that is, it's classed as a terrorist group by the American government. So it was like, are we with Al-Shabaab? Are we with the Mujahideen? Are we with criminals? So they're constantly not knowing who you're dealing with.
What's the way that your conversation with Amanda is going at the time? Are you panicking? Are you trying to hold it together? Or?
No, look, certainly in those first few days trying to hold it together. It was, I don't know, it was maybe after about a week I probably started to spin out of control completely with depression and guilt and shame and all those sorts of emotions you go through, not just for what had happened to my life, but what I had, what I was putting my family through. Was angry at Amanda, wanted to blame her for what had happened to me.
Yep.
And I was, withdrawing from her, not speaking to her. So we were fortunate enough to be able to stay in a room together for 2 months. But I guess it was around the second week where I started to withdraw from her, not talk to her, which is difficult when you're in a room together. Yeah. I guess it's like living with someone who's an incredibly moody person. And it was about after 2 weeks when she sort of slapped me about a bit and said, you need to be a little bit more positive. we need to work together here. We need to have a peer support sort of system, because there's going to be days when I'm not having a good time that you're going to need to sort of pick me up. And I guess one of those things, you know, I didn't want to hear that at the time because I was angry at her, and then I woke up the next morning and just I'd realised, I guess, that I'd been a bit of a prat, and I wasn't taking responsibility for my own actions. And that I only had her, and I was incredibly fortunate, you know, in hindsight, to know that I was going through that experience with someone else.
Yeah, very much. After the break, we'll talk with Nigel about life as a hostage, some of the decisions that they made in order to keep themselves safe.